I want you to start by just visualizing a map, a standard world map.
Like the kind you'd see in a high school classroom.
Right, exactly. You see the bright colors, the sharp black lines dividing France from Germany, the United States from Mexico, Brazil from Peru.
It's the picture of the world we're all used to.
It dictates how we travel, how we trade, and, well, how we identify ourselves.
It's basically the definitive guide to human geography.
Exactly, human geography. But now, I want you to layer over that map a entirely different kind of data.
Okay.
Imagine the migration path of a golden eagle, or the subterranean flow of a huge groundwater aquifer.
Or even the sprawling root system of a massive forest.
Right. What happens to those sharp black lines?
They dissolve. I mean, biology doesn't stop at a checkpoint.
An eagle doesn't need a visa.
Exactly.
But, and this is really the crux of what we're diving into today, we manage the eagle as if it does. We manage the forest as if those political lines are physical walls. And according to the research we have in front of us, that mismatch is a complete catastrophe for the planet.
It is a fundamental error in how we approach conservation honestly. We are trying to force a dynamic, fluid, natural world into a static, rigid political grid.
And to unpack that, we are looking at a really heavy-hitting paper today. It was published in Conservation Biology. The year is 2026.
And it have quite the title.
It's a bit of a mouthful, yeah. It's called Intertwined Threats of Nationalized Nature and Privatized Ecological Research for Global Biodiversity Conservation.
The lead author is Philip J. Haubrock, and he's working with a really extensive team of international researchers on this one.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically unpack this paper for you. We're going to investigate what the authors are arguing, why this topic matters so much right now, and what they discovered.
And it is a theoretical study, which is important to note. They synthesized a massive amount of existing problems into a cohesive argument.
Right, they're looking at the broader implications for both science and society. Their argument is essentially that two things, nationalized nature and privatized research, are actively strangling our ability to save biodiversity.
It's all about how we fence off the land with borders, and then we turn around and fence off the data with paywalls.
Two sides of the same coin. Let's start with the first side, which is nationalized nature. The authors call borders imaginary lines.
Which, ecologically speaking, they completely are. The paper uses a really interesting visual reference for this. It's figure 1 in the study.
Right.
They look at massive nations like the United States, China, Brazil. These are huge land masses.
I mean, Brazil alone covers what? The Amazon, the Cerrado, the Atlantic forest, so many different ecosystems.
Exactly. But the government tends to apply a single national logic to managing all of them.
It's a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yes. And it gets even more complicated when you look at borders that slice right through a single ecosystem.
Like the U.S.-Mexico border wall. They point specifically to that.
They do. It's a 3,200-kilometer barrier. And usually when that wall comes up in conversation, it's strictly about immigration or national security.
Politics, basically.
Right. But Haubrock and his team are asking us to look at the biological cost. Because that wall isn't just stopping people. It is physically fragmenting habitats.
So you have jaguars, peccaries, even low-flying birds or pollinators that are suddenly hitting a concrete dead end.
Precisely. You're taking a population that has mixed and bred freely for thousands of years, and you're just cutting it in half.
Which has to reduce genetic diversity.
Severely. It also cuts off escape roads. Say a wildfire starts on the south side of the wall. Animals can't flee north anymore.
Wow, yeah.
It creates these artificial islands of nature that are just much weaker than the whole system used to be.
It's like dropping a guillotine on a living system. But the paper brings up another example that I found even more mind-bending, mostly because there's no physical wall involved at all.
Oh, the fish in the Danube River.
Yes. I've been calling this Schrodinger's fish in my head, because its status seems to exist in two completely different states at the exact same time.
It is a perfect example of what the authors call fragmented management regimes. So the Danube flows through 10 different countries.
It's a massive aquatic highway.
Right. Now, I want you to imagine you are a common carp, Soprinus carpio, swimming downstream.
Okay, I'm the fish. I'm swimming through, let's say, Austria.
In that specific stretch of the river, you might be classified as a native species.
Nice.
You are protected. There are strict limits on how many of you can be caught. You are seen as a valued part of the ecosystem's heritage.
So I'm feeling good, feeling safe.
But then you keep swimming. You cross an invisible line in the water. There is no wall, no net, nothing changes
If
physically.
you enter in a neighboring country.
Exactly. And suddenly your classification flips. Now, you are listed as non-native.
Wait, same fish, same water, same river.
Same biology.
Ah.
But the politics have changed. In this new country, the management strategy might be total eradication.
You're kidding.
No, they might be literally poisoning the water to get rid of you, or paying local anglers a bounty to catch you.
That seems absolutely insane. How can you possibly conserve a species if half the river is a sanctuary and the other half is a kill zone?
You can't. That is exactly the author's point. When we treat biodiversity as national assets, almost like it's part of our GDP, we miss the bigger picture.
Because nature is a global system.
It requires consistency. But instead, what we get is this completely absurd patchwork of conflicting laws.
Which brings us to the second major threat the paper identifies. And this one is maybe even more subtle. It's about the actual language we use, the language of division.
This is where the paper challenges some very deeply held assumptions in ecology. We are talking about the binary of native versus non-native.
Right, because I think for most of us, native means good and invasive, or non-native means bad.
That's the common perception, yeah.
If I hear a plant is invasive, my immediate assumption is that it's destroying the environment.
And to be fair, often invasive species do cause significant harm. The authors aren't denying that reality.
They aren't saying we should just let rats run wild on sensitive islands.
Exactly. But they are arguing that the core concept of nativeness is often a historical or a political construct, not strictly a biological one.
That's so.
Well, they refer to it as a cultural narrative of belonging. Think about the timeline for a second. When does a species officially become native?
That's a good question.
If a bird arrived 500 years ago, is it native now? What if it arrived 2,000 years ago?
It feels pretty arbitrary when you put it like that.
It is arbitrary. The paper points out that we frequently use xenophobic or value-loaded language in biology. We call species aliens, pests, or invaders.
It frames nature as a war, like it's us, the native species, against them, the outsiders.
It parallels human nationalism incredibly closely. And this obsession with defining what belongs here leads to a massive blind spot in conservation.
The dark diversity concept.
Dark diversity.
Which I have to say sounds like the title of a sci-fi thriller.
It really does. But it's a very practical, very real concept. Dark diversity refers to the species that could live in an area. The biological conditions are perfect for them, but they aren't currently present there.
Okay. Why is that important for us to track?
Because when individual countries make their national lists of biodiversity, they only count what they physically see right now.
Right.
Yeah. But what we see right now is just a fraction of what used to be there, or what could be there. We suffer from what ecologists call a shifting baseline.
We just assume the degraded nature we see today is normal.
Exactly. We accept the current impoverished state as the baseline.
And I'm guessing our lists are also heavily biased by what we actually like to count.
Oh, massively. The authors call that a huge taxonomic bias. We count the pandas, the eagles, the tigers.
The charismatic megafauna, the stuff that looks good on a postage stamp.
Precisely. We tend to completely ignore the slime molds, the fungi, the deep-sea invertebrates. If it's not cute or majestic, it just doesn't get on the list.
So our national inventories are essentially flawed from the start. They're incomplete snapshots based on arbitrary political borders and, frankly, popularity contests.
That is exactly what they are. And the problem is, if the national lists are wrong, then our global estimates of biodiversity loss are likely wrong too.
Because the global data is just a sum of the national data.
Right. We might think a species is going extinct globally because it disappeared from one country's list, but maybe it just migrated next door due to climate change.
Or conversely, we think a species is totally safe because it's abundant in our specific country, but globally its population is crashing.
This national tunnel vision completely distorts the actual biological data.
Which is a perfect segue to the second half of the paper's main argument. We've talked about nationalized nature, the physical borders, and the linguistic borders.
Yes.
Now let's pivot to privatized research. The borders we put around knowledge itself.
This is where the authors turn their critique inward toward the scientific community itself. They argue that just as we fence off the physical world, we fence off the data about the physical world.
And this isn't just about scientists being inherently secretive, right? It's about the entire business model of modern science. The paper explicitly calls out the publish or perish trap.
If you work in academia, you know this pressure all too well. Researchers are heavily incentivized to hoard their data.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Okay, imagine you are an ecologist. You spend 3 grueling years in the field collecting raw data on that Danube carp we talked about.
Okay, I've got my data.
That data is your primary currency. You need to squeeze as many peer-reviewed publications out of it as possible to get tenure or to get a promotion or to secure your next grant.
So I definitely don't want to just give it away.
Exactly. The paper quotes this directly, noting there is a pervasive reluctance to make data available to people other than those who have generated them.
I found it, it's mine.
Right. But the authors point out a glaring contradiction here regarding the funding, because who actually pays for the vast majority of this research?
Well, in most cases, it's the public. It's taxpayer money distributed via government grants.
Billions of dollars of it.
Yeah.
So the public pays for the research, the scientist does the work, but then the final results are handed over to private academic journals.
Who immediately lock it behind a paywall.
A very steep paywall. So if the public, or even a conservation policymaker in a developing nation, wants to read the results of the research they effectively paid for,
they have to pay again just to read the PDF.
Exactly. It is the ultimate double dip.
And for a global crisis like biodiversity loss, that seems like a fatal flaw in the system. If the repair manual for the planet is locked inside a safe, how are we supposed to fix the engine?
We can't. And this system drives huge systemic inequity globally. The paper spends a good amount of time discussing parachute science, which is sometimes called helicopter research.
This is a term I've been hearing more often lately. What does parachute science actually look like in practice?
Imagine a team of well-funded researchers from a wealthy nation, say a top university in the US or Western Europe. They secure a massive grant.
Okay.
They fly into a biodiversity hotspot, which is usually located in the global south. The Amazon, the Congo Basin, Indonesia.
So they literally drop in, get the goods, and get out.
They collect hard drives full of data, physical samples, environmental DNA. Then they pack up and fly back to their comfortable labs in the global north.
Do the local people get involved?
They analyze the data back home, and they publish the papers in those expensive journals. Often, the local people who actually guided them through the forest or identified the rare plants get absolutely no credit.
No co-authorship.
Rarely.
And I'm assuming the local institutions don't even get access to the data that was taken from their own backyard.
Often they don't. It is fundamentally an extraction economy. They are extracting knowledge just like a mining company extracts ore. The wealth, in this case intellectual wealth, flows strictly one way.
And that has to create a vicious feedback loop. Because the wealthy nations control the funding and the prestigious journals, they get to decide what topics actually matter.
Exactly. If a specific conservation problem is critical to a local community in Brazil, but it isn't considered trendy or high impact by editors in London or New York, it gets ignored.
It doesn't get funded.
Right. So our entire global map of ecological knowledge ends up being incredibly biased toward the interests and priorities of rich nations.
Which brings up a really modern, honestly terrifying point the paper makes about how all this connects to artificial intelligence.
Yes, the technological acceleration. This is a very keen insight from the authors. We're increasingly relying on AI to model climate change, to predict species migration, to plan complex conservation strategies.
But AI is only as good as the data you feed into it.
Precisely. It's the classic garbage in, garbage out problem.
So if the only data available to train these AI models is the biased partial data from wealthy nations,
because everything else is either locked behind proprietary paywalls or was simply never collected due to lack of local funding,
then the AI's conclusions will be completely biased too.
that is the danger. We risk automating our own ignorance. We could end up with AI conservation tools that work flawlessly for Northern Europe, but fail miserably when applied to Africa or South America, because the algorithm literally hasn't seen that part of the world in its training data.
Okay, we have laid out a pretty devastating critique here. Borders slicing up ecosystems, xenophobic language biasing our view of nature, paywalls locking up the solutions, and AI potentially amplifying the whole mess.
It is a lot.
Please tell me Haubrock and his team have a proposed way out of this.
They do. And I'll be upfront, it is highly ambitious. They aren't just asking for small tweaks to the grant process, they are calling for what they term supranational ecological governance.
Supranational, meaning governance above the level of the nation-state.
Yes. The underlying argument is very straightforward. If nature operates on a global scale, governance must operate on a global scale. The scale of the management has to match the scale of the ecosystem.
So we aren't just talking about international treaties where countries promise to play nice and then ignore it. This is actual binding governance.
Exactly.
What are the specific mechanisms they propose to make that happen?
They outline a few concrete ideas. First is a biodiversity equity fund.
Okay.
Think of it somewhat like the Green Climate Fund, but designed specifically for nature and biodiversity.
How would that actually fix the funding bias we were just talking about?
Currently, most research funding stays in the country where it is raised. The equity fund would completely change that model. It would ensure money goes where the biodiversity actually is, based on ecological urgency, not just where the richest universities happen to be located.
Put the resources where the fire is, not just where the fire station is.
Exactly. Funding would flow significantly to the global south to protect the most critical, threatened ecosystems, regardless of that specific nation's GDP.
That makes perfect sense. What else?
Second, they call for a global data commons. This would be a true, mandated open access policy. They argue that data on biodiversity must be shared globally by default, breaking down those proprietary, profit-driven business models of the major journals.
Basically, if the public pays for it, the world gets to see it.
Period. No paywalls on extinction data.
Now, I can definitely hear the skeptics in the audience right now. Global governance sounds a bit like a pipe dream in our current political climate. Do the authors provide any proof that this kind of cross-border management can actually work?
They do. They specifically cite the European Union's Natura 2000 network. Now, obviously, the EU has its own complex political issues, but Natura 2000 is a network of core breeding and resting sites for rare and threatened species that stretches across 27 different countries.
Wow, 27 countries.
It proves that you can have cross-border ecological rules that function in the real world. You can have a bird sanctuary in Spain that is legally connected to one in France, managed under a shared overarching framework.
So it's demonstrably not impossible.
Right.
But there's a serious tension here, isn't there? If we move all this governance up to this massive supranational level, don't we risk completely alienating the locals?
That is the risk, yes.
Like, if I'm a local community living in the forest, do I really want a bureaucrat sitting in an office in Geneva telling me how I'm allowed to manage my own backyard?
That is the critical tension, and it's a very valid concern. But the authors address it directly. They argue for a rerouting of stewardship alongside this global governance.
What does that mean in practice?
It means that while the overarching governance and data standards might be supranational, the actual stewardship on the ground must remain deeply local.
So global rules, but local hands.
Yes. They heavily emphasize the need to empower local communities, and they specifically bring up indigenous data governance. They point to the CARE principles.
CARE. C-A-R-E. What does that acronym stand for?
It stands for Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility, and Ethics.
Okay.
It is a framework designed to ensure that indigenous people retain control over their own data and traditional knowledge.
Which would directly prevent that parachute science we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The local community shouldn't just be passive subjects of foreign research. They should be the primary owners and directors of it.
It's a really delicate balance. You're trying to squeeze the rigid nation state out of the way to let nature breathe, but at the same time, you're ensuring the people actually living in that nature are the ones legally and financially empowered to care for it.
Exactly. It's about breaking the monopoly of the nation-state from both ends simultaneously. From above with global governance, and from below with local indigenous empowerment.
Now, as we start to wrap this up, we have to acknowledge the reality check here. The authors themselves admit this paper is intentionally theoretical.
They do. They are very clear about that. They aren't trying to write a specific new law for the UN that's going to somehow pass tomorrow morning.
Right.
They know full well that asking sovereign nations to voluntarily give up authority over their own natural resources is a massive, almost unprecedented political hurdle.
Because history shows that countries really don't like being told what to do with their own territory. Telling a sovereign nation they can't dam a river because of a fish swimming upstream is a very tough sell.
It is a huge ask. But so what for you listening right now is undeniable? Why does this theoretical debate matter to the average person?
Because nature is the life support system for all of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the repair manual, which is the ecological research, is locked in a private safe, and the mechanics, the individual nations, refuse to talk to each other, the entire system fails.
We're trying to fix a crashing spaceship while arguing over who legally owns the wrench.
That's a great way to put it. And half the crew is deliberately hiding the blueprints from the other half to secure a promotion. We are driving blind because our political maps don't match the biological territory.
So, as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We spent a lot of time today talking about lines on maps.
The imaginary lines.
If nature doesn't recognize the line on the map between us and them, if that hawk flying overhead or that fish in the Danube genuinely doesn't care about borders, why are we still managing the planet as if it does?
It really raises the ultimate question. Is it finally time for us to declare nature stateless?
A stateless nature, that is something to really sit with and explore on your own.
It fundamentally changes everything about how we view the world if you truly accept it.
It absolutely does. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us on this journey into the tangled web of borders, biology, and bureaucracy. It is a lot of heavy information to process, but understanding these invisible walls is the very first step to finally tearing them down.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode.